Welcome back to the deep dive. I was thinking on the way into the studio today about how the entire conversation around energy has just completely changed.
Night and day, isn't it?
It really is. 10 years ago, if I brought up solar power at I don't know, a dinner party, it felt like a charity appeal.
Right. It was a moral conversation.
Exactly. It was soft. It was all about saving the polar bears and maybe, if you were lucky, shaving $10 off your electric bill. It felt polite.
Do the right thing, even if it cost a little bit more. That was the whole pitch.
That was the pitch. It was a nice to have. But today, we are throwing that entire script in the trash. We're plugging into something, truly high voltage, and I don't mean that metaphorically. We're talking about a hard-nosed, industrial, massive-scale economic boom that is literally physically reshaping the Indian landscape. This isn't about morality anymore. This is about math.
It really is a different world. The conversation has shifted from, is this possible? Or, is this cute? To how fast can we pour the concrete? And can the grid even handle this much power?
The scale is what gets me. It's just, it's hard to get your head around. We are not talking about rooftop panels on a suburban house anymore.
No, not at all.
We are talking about gigawatts. And to navigate this huge shift, we're looking at a company that seems to have strapped a rocket engine to its back. The subject of today's deep dive is Emmvee, photovoltaic power.
And it's a fascinating case study. Truly.
Yeah.
Because usually when we talk about the energy transition, we talk about the big utility giants or, government policy.
Right, the macro stuff.
The macro stuff. But Emmvee is a manufacturing story. They are the ones actually building the hardware. They're bending the metal and processing the silicon. And the numbers they are putting up, they're just staggering.
Okay, let's just put the number out there. 162% revenue growth in the first 9 months of the fiscal year ending 2026.
162%.
Let's just pause on that for a second. If a software startup in Silicon Valley did that, they'd be on the cover of every magazine. They'd be the next unicorn.
Absolutely. But this is a factory.
This is a factory. This is a company making physical things. And that is our mission today. We aren't just going to stare at the stock chart and say, wow, line go up.
No.
We need to figure out how. How does a manufacturing company scale that fast in such a high-stakes, high-capital environment? We're going to unpack the technology shift. There's this term, TOPCon, which sounds like a military operation, but it's actually critical physics.
And it's a huge part of the story.
We'll look at this strategy of backward integration, which sounds like jargon, but it's the core of their profitability. And of course, we have to look at the risks.
Because when you grow this fast, things can break. And in a commodity market, believe me, there are always sharks in the water.
All right, let's set the stage. Part 1, the landscape. Why solar? And why now? I feel like I've been hearing about the solar revolution for 20 years. What makes 2025 and 2026 the actual tipping point? Is it just that the government is throwing a ton of subsidy money at it?
That's the most common misconception. And it's an easy one to have because for a long time, it was true. People think renewables are being propped up by government handouts.
The training wheels are still on, so to speak.
Right. And sure, 10 years ago, that was definitely the case. But today, the training wheels are off. Yeah. They're not just off, they're in a museum. The driver now is brutal, simple economics.
Okay.
We've reached a structural tipping point where solar tariffs, and that's the price you pay for the electricity, are consistently, and I mean consistently, lower than the cost of new thermal power.
So you're telling me coal and gas are now the luxury option? That feels so backwards considering how cheap coal was for, a century.
It does feel backwards, but the data is undeniable. Let's look at the hard numbers. If you look at recent contracts for solar plus storage, and that's a key phrase.
Okay, unpack that. Solar plus storage.
So that is not just the panel generating power when the sun shines. That's the old problem with solar, right? What happens at night.
The intermittency problem.
Exactly. This is solar panels paired with massive batteries to store that energy for the evening for peak demand. The whole package. The tariffs for that are coming in at the 3 to 3.5 rupee per unit range.
Okay, 3 to 3.5 rupees. Let's lock that number in our heads. So how does that compare to the old school thermal plants?
Well, the marginal cost for thermal power, and this is important, this isn't even the cost to build a new plant. This is just the cost to burn the fuel and keep an existing plant running.
Just the variable cost.
Just the variable cost. That is sitting somewhere between 5.4 and 5.8 rupees per unit.
Whoa, wait. So solar with batteries, which solves the nighttime problem, is nearly half the price of just the fuel for a coal plant.
You got it. That's the tipping point. It's not a small difference. It's a chasm. And here's where it gets really interesting for, the finance nerds out there. It's all about the risk profile.
Lay it on us. I'm a finance nerd today.
Okay, so when a utility company signs a contract for thermal power, they are exposed to fuel risk. The price of coal is variable. It goes up and down with global markets, with mining strikes, with transport costs.
Right. It's unpredictable. There's a war somewhere, and suddenly your electricity costs more.
Precisely. Inflation hits coal hard. So your electricity bill in year 5 of that contract might be way higher than it was in year 1. You have no certainty.
Your costs are a moving target.
But with a solar contract, especially these 25-year power purchase agreements or PPAs, you are locking in that price. That 3 rupees, that's your price for the next 25 years.
I love this. The sun doesn't send you a bill.
The sun doesn't charge for inflation. The sun doesn't go on strike.
The sun doesn't charge for inflation. That should be on a t-shirt.
It's true. I mean, think about it like this. It's the difference between renting an apartment where the landlord raises your rent 5% every single year versus locking in a 25-year mortgage at a rock-bottom rate.
Right.
Even if the mortgage was slightly more expensive today, which, as we just established, it isn't, you would still take the deal just for the stability. But right now, you get the stability and the lower price.
It's a complete no-brainer for the utility companies, for the people buying the power.
It's an economic inevitability at this point.
So the demand isn't artificial. It's not propped up. It's economic gravity pulling the industry forward. But there's another layer to this landscape, right? Because we aren't just talking about a pure free market where anyone can show up and sell panels. We're talking about India. And there is a very, very specific regulatory wall that has been built around this entire industry.
You absolutely cannot discuss the Indian solar market without talking about the ALMM.
The ALMM. Okay, that's another acronym. The Approved List of Models and Manufacturers. It sounds like a boring bureaucratic checklist.
It sounds dry, doesn't it? But in reality, it's more like a VIP list for the entire industry. It's the bouncer at the door of the club.
The ultimate gatekeeper. Okay, explain how it works.
So here's how it works. The government, a few years back, essentially created this barrier to entry. If you want to supply your solar modules to any government-backed project, and you have to remember, the government is tendering 50 gigawatts a year.
Which is a massive chunk of the market.
It's the lion's share of the market. To get a piece of that action, you must be on this list, period.
And I'm guessing getting on the list isn't just about, filling out a PDF form on a government website?
Not quite. It involves rigorous inspections of your manufacturing facilities by government officials. They come to your factory, they check your capacity, your quality standards, your financials, the whole 9 yards. But the primary effect of the ALMM, the real reason it exists, is that it effectively blocks non-compliant imports.
And when we say imports in the solar world, we are mostly using a polite euphemism for China, right?
That is the subtext, yes.
Yeah.
Look, China dominates the global solar supply chain. It's not even close. They have economies of scale that are, they're terrifying for competitors in other countries.
So the ALMM is basically a shield. It's a non-tariff barrier that says, if you want access to this massive, growing Indian market, you have to play by our rules, and preferably, you need to set up shop and manufacture here.
Exactly that. It protects domestic players like Emmvee from being flooded by cheap imports that might be subsidized by foreign governments, which would make it impossible to compete. But then it goes a step further.
There's more.
There's more. It goes a step further with something called DCR, Domestic Content Requirement.
Okay, this is another term I saw popping up everywhere in the notes. DCR. So how is that different from just being on the ALMM list?
That's a great question, and the distinction is crucial. ALMM is about the company. It says, is this manufacturer approved? DCR is about the ingredients.
The ingredients in the panel.
The ingredients inside the panel. DCR is a mandate that gets attached to specific high-priority government projects. Things like the PM-KUM scheme for farmers, or big projects for public sector undertakings.
So strategic projects.
Exactly. And for these projects, the rule says that not only must the manufacturer be on the ALMM list, but the key components inside the panel, specifically the solar cells, must also be made in India.
Ah, okay, that is a critical distinction. So it's like saying you can't just assemble the car here using an engine you bought from abroad. You
Yes.
have to cast the engine block here in this country too.
That is a perfect analogy. And this is what really tightens the supply. Because while there are many companies assembling modules, it's relatively easy, to bolt glass and frames and wires together. There are far, far fewer companies making the actual cells.
That's the high-tech part.
That's the high-tech part. That's the chemistry and the physics. So this creates a supply crunch for these DCR-compliant modules, which naturally boosts the profitability for the few companies that can actually make them.
Which brings us perfectly, almost like we planned it, to our protagonist today, Emmvee. Because they aren't just putting glass and frames together, they are doing the hard stuff.
They're casting the engine block.
They're casting the engine block. So let's dive into part two. Who is Emmvee? Because before I read the research for this, I just assumed, a solar company is a solar company. You make the rectangle thing that goes on the roof. But Emmvee seems to be operating on a completely different level.
They are one of the veterans, actually. They aren't some new startup just riding the hype cycle. They've been around for a long time, and historically they were big in solar water heating systems and pumps.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, which gave them a really solid engineering and manufacturing foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But their profile has changed dramatically in the last few years. Today, they manufacture the solar PV modules. That's the panels we all see. But crucially, they also manufacture the solar cells, the engine inside the panel.
And the scale is what just jumped out at me from the page. As of December 2025, they have 10.3 gigawatts of module capacity.
It's a massive number. To give you and the listeners some sense of scale, a standard nuclear power plant, a big one, might be 1 or 2 gigawatts.
Okay.
Emmvee has the capacity to produce enough modules to equal 5 to 10 nuclear plants worth of peak power every single year.
That is mind-boggling. I mean, that's a nation-building scale of manufacturing. And they also have 2.94 gigawatts of cell capacity, so they aren't perfectly matched yet.
Not yet.
They make more modules than cells, but that cell capacity is still very significant.
It is. And that discrepancy, that gap between the two, is actually where the strategy lies. This brings us to the core concept, the real aha moment for their business model: backward integration.
Okay, let's unpack backward integration. It sounds like something from a business school textbook, but you flag this as the absolute key to understanding their success. Why is it so important?
Okay, think about the solar supply chain. It's a line. You start with silicon rock, you turn it into a shiny wafer, you turn the wafer into a cell, and then you put a bunch of cells into a module.
Got it. A production line.
Right. Most solar companies in India, historically, were just at the very end of that line. They were module assemblers. They would just buy the cells, mostly from China or Taiwan, put them in a frame with some glass and some wiring, and sell the finished module.
So they were basically just assembly lines. Pretty low value add, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Low value add, and because of that, they had razor-thin margins. If the price of cells from China went up 1 month, their entire profit for the quarter could just vanish. They're completely at the mercy of their suppliers.
They had no control.
No control at all. Emmvee made a strategic decision to move backward down the supply chain. They said, we are not just going to buy the cells anymore. We are going to build the factory to make the cells ourselves.
I want to use an analogy here because I think this really helps visualize the business model. It's like running a high-end Italian restaurant.
Okay, I like it.
Most restaurants, even good ones, buy their pasta dried in a box from a supplier. It's cheap, it's easy, it's consistent. But if the price of pasta goes up, or the shipment is late, or the quality is suddenly bad, you're in serious trouble.
Your menu is wrecked.
Your menu is wrecked. Emmvee is the restaurant that built a climate-controlled room in the back of the kitchen to make their own fresh pasta from scratch, using their own flour and eggs.
That is a perfect analogy. It's perfect. And why do you make your own pasta? There are 2 big reasons. The first is quality control. You know what goes into it. But the second, and for this story the most important, is cost control.
Right.
When Emmvee uses their own captive cells, that's the industry term for cells they made themselves, they aren't paying the profit margin of a cell supplier. They get to keep that margin for themselves.
It's pure cost for them, not cost plus somebody else's profit.
Exactly. And we can see the proof of that logic directly in the financial numbers, right?
It's not just a theory.
It's not a theory. In the first 9 months of the fiscal year 2026, their EBITDA, which is basically their operating profit, a good measure of core profitability, it surged by 222%.
222%. So profits grew way faster than their sales.
Way faster. And that's not just because they sold more panels. That is because they made more money on every single panel they sold. And management, in their own reports, explicitly linked this massive jump to increased captive cell usage.
So by making their own ingredients, the final dish is just way, way more profitable.
Infinitely more profitable. And then there's the security aspect, too. Supply chain security. Remember that DCR rule we talked about a minute ago, where you have to use local cells for certain projects?
Right, the strategic ones.
Well, if you are a module maker who doesn't make your own cells, you have to go out into the open market in India and fight with all your competitors to buy those DCR-compliant cells from someone else. And since the supply is tight,
You're going to pay a massive premium. It's a seller's market.
it's a seller's market. You're going to pay through the nose. Emmvee doesn't have to fight anyone. They don't have to make that phone call. They just take the cells from their own factory next door. That gives them a massive, massive advantage in bidding for those lucrative government projects.
It's really impressive. They've essentially built this fortress where they control their own destiny, insulated from a lot of the global volatility. But it's not just about making the same old stuff yourself. They also made a huge, and I mean huge, pivot in what they are making.
Yes.
And this brings us to part 3, the technology pivot.
This is so critical because in the solar industry, technology moves incredibly fast. If you are manufacturing the best technology from 5 years ago, you're basically manufacturing expensive junk. Nobody wants it.
You're making VCRs in the age of Netflix.
You really are.
Yeah.
And the term that kept coming up in all the source material was TOPCon. TOPCon. It sounds like a comic book convention. Hey, you go to TOPCon 2026? But what is it actually? It stands for tunnel oxide passivated contact.
Okay, nope. That's way too much jargon. You lost me. Translate that for us mortals.
Fair enough, fair enough. Let's keep it really simple. Think of a solar cell as a little bucket that catches particles of sunlight photons and turns them into electrons, which is just electricity.
Okay, a sunlight to electron bucket. I'm with you.
Right. The previous industry standard for solar cells was a technology called monoperia. It was good, it was reliable, it did the job, but it had leaks. As the electrons bounced around inside the silicon wafer, some of them would find a defect, recombine, and get lost as heat before they could exit the wire as useful electricity.
So you're losing potential energy. The bucket has tiny holes in it.
The bucket has holes. That's the perfect way to think about it. TOPCon is the next evolution. It adds a microscopically thin layer, that's the tunnel oxide, that essentially acts as a one-way filter. It lets the useful current flow out, but it blocks the electrons from finding those defects and recombining. It patches the holes in the bucket.
So simply put, you take the same size panel, point it at the same sun, and you get more electricity coming out of the wire.
It's exactly higher efficiency. And in the solar game, efficiency is absolutely everything. Because think about it from the developer's point of view. If a developer is renting, say, 500 acres of land for a solar farm, they have fixed costs. They're paying for the land lease, the fencing, the security guards, the access roads.
All that costs the same whether the panels are good or bad.
Exactly. So your panels are even 1% more efficient. That means you generate more power and more revenue from the same 500 acres. Over the 25-year life of the project, that 1% can translate into millions and millions of dollars in extra revenue.
And Emmvee didn't just, dip their toe in the water with this TOPCon stuff. They didn't just test it out. They dove in head first.
They absolutely did. It was a huge bet. In the second quarter of FY26, Emmvee shifted their entire sales mix to 100% TOPCon modules.
100%.
100%. They completely stopped selling the older monoper stuff. Just cut it off.
That feels incredibly risky, doesn't it? To just abandon your old product line entirely. Usually companies phase these things out slowly over years.
It is bold. It's a burn the boats kind of strategy.
Yeah.
But it shows they read the market correctly and had conviction. They realized the entire industry was shifting, and they didn't want to be the ones left holding warehouses full of obsolete tech when the music stopped.
They wanted to be ahead of the curve, not behind it.
Way ahead. They decided monoperc is rapidly becoming a low-margin commodity, and TOPCon is the new premium standard. And they didn't just guess at how to do this. This wasn't a gamble in the dark. They partnered with Fraunhofer IC.
Fraunhofer, that's a big name in engineering circles.
They are the gold standard for solar R&D. That's the Institute for Solar Energy Systems in Germany. Bringing in top-tier German engineering to help design and set up your production line gives you a level of credibility and technical assurance that is just priceless. It de-risks the whole operation.
So we have the what, it's TOPCon, the better bucket. But let's connect this to the so what, the money. Because high tech usually means high cost to manufacture. Did this huge risky bet actually pay off?
It paid off handsomely. It's probably the single biggest driver of their recent success. Because TOPCon is a premium product, it commands a higher price in the market. You simply aren't competing in the bargain bin with the commodity guys anymore.
You've moved up market.
You've moved up market. And this strategic shift is a major reason why their EBITDA margins hit around 35%.
35%. Let's just sit with that. A 35% margin in a manufacturing business. That is incredibly high. I mean, usually manufacturing is a game of pennies. You grind out 10%, maybe 12% if you're really good. 35% is software company territory.
It is massive, and it's the perfect storm of two things we've talked about. It reflects that premium pricing power from the superior technology, combined with the cost control from that backward integration.
The pasta analogy again.
It's the pasta analogy. They are selling a premium dish, but they're making the premium ingredients themselves at cost. That spreads the margin at both ends of the process.
And the market is validating this, right? It's not just them saying, hey, our tech is cool. They are getting actual orders for this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The proof is in the order book. Look at the massive order they got from KPI Green Energy. That was a 15 billion rupee order. That's not a small number. And they specifically ordered TOPCon bifacial modules.
Okay, another term, bifacial. What does that mean? They collect light from both sides.
Exactly. The front of the panel captures the direct sunlight coming down, and the back of the panel is also made of glass, and it captures the light that reflects off the ground.
Oh, wow. So you get a little extra juice from reflected light.
You do. It's another efficiency booster, especially in certain environments like deserts or snowy areas. But the key point is this. The fact that a major independent power producer like KPI Green is placing a multi-billion rupee order specifically for this advanced technology proves that the market has moved on from the old stuff. Emmvee was ready for that shift when it happened.
Okay, this is a great picture. So they have the macro tailwinds from the cheap economics of solar. They have the regulatory moat from the government. They have the integrated factory making their own parts. And they have the cutting-edge tech. Now, let's look at the scoreboard. Part 4, the numbers. Because frankly, when I saw these stats, I had to double-check them to make sure there wasn't a typo.
It's February 2026, and the numbers they've posted recently really are a rocket ship scenario. There's no other way to describe it.
Let's do a quick stats blitz for the listeners just to put this into perspective. First, let's talk about revenue. For the first 9 months of FY26, their revenue is up 162% compared to the same period last year.
162%. That is more than doubling, and then some. And what that signals is that their new capacities, those new factories they spent all that money to build, came online and immediately started shipping product at full tilt. They didn't have idle factories waiting for customers. The demand was there, coiled like a spring, just waiting for them.
Okay, second stat, and maybe the more important one, EBITDA. That's up 222%. So their profits grew even faster than their revenue.
And that's a concept called operating leverage. It's beautiful when it works in your favor. As you scale up your production, your fixed costs, your corporate headquarters, your HR department, your R&D lab, those costs get spread over more and more units sold. So each unit becomes more profitable. Their margins are expanding as they grow.
And the third key stat, the one that looks to the future, is the order book. As of December 2025, they are sitting on an order book of 9.3 gigawatts.
This is probably the most important number for anyone trying to understand the company's immediate future. 9.3 gigawatts is a huge number in itself, but the context is what matters more.
What's the context?
6.3 gigawatts of that 9.3 is deliverable within the next 12 months.
And why does that specific distinction matter so much?
Because sometimes you see companies announce these huge order books that are just vague agreements or, memorandums of understanding that might happen over the next 5 years, maybe. They're not firm. This is different. This is firm. This provides immense visibility. We effectively know with a high degree of certainty what their revenue is going to look like for the next year because it's already contracted.
It de-risks the immediate future.
Massively.
Now, I want to pivot from the income statement to the balance sheet. Because usually when I see a company growing this fast, building massive factories, buying expensive German robots, importing raw materials, I make an assumption. I assume they are drowning in debt.
It's a safe assumption.
You had to borrow money to build stuff.
Hey, that's just capitalism 101.
That is the standard playbook. You leverage up to grow, you take on debt, you build the factory, you hope the sales come in to pay it off. But Emmvee has pulled off something genuinely surprising here, something you almost never see.
What is it?
Their net debt to equity ratio is 0.02x. Negative debt. Wait, explain that to me like I'm 5. What does that actually mean?
It means that if you take all the money they owe to the banks and other lenders, and then you subtract the cash they have sitting in their bank account, you end up with a negative number.
So they have more cash than debt?
You have more cash than debt. They are, for all intents and purposes, cash positive. They could pay off all their loans tomorrow and still have money left over.
How is that even possible when they are expanding capacity so aggressively? Where is the money coming from?
It goes right back to those fat 35% margins and very efficient working capital management. They're generating so much cash from their day-to-day operations that they can fund their own growth. They are a self-funding rocket ship. They aren't relying on bank loans to keep the lights on or to pour the concrete for the next factory.
That is a unicorn situation in the infrastructure manufacturing world. It's almost unheard of. And the returns, what does this mean for the shareholders?
Well, the return on equity, or ROE, is sitting at nearly 50%.
50%.
Yes. And ROE is a measure of how efficiently the company is using shareholder capital to generate profits. A 50% ROE is stellar. It means for every dollar of equity in the company, they generated 50 cents of profit in a year. It's just an incredibly efficient machine right now.
Okay, so at this point in our deep dive, Emmvee sounds absolutely invincible. They have the tech, they have the insane margins, they have the cash, they have the government protection. But, and you know there is always a but on this show.
There is always a but.
Nothing goes up in a straight line forever. We need to look at the other side of the coin. It's time to be skeptical.
Absolutely. We have to. This is part 5. Future growth and risks. Because the higher you fly, the thinner the air gets. And the solar industry historically is a graveyard full of darlings that suddenly crashed and burned.
So let's talk about where they go from here first. What's the next move on the chessboard for them?
Well, the growth plan is pretty straightforward on the surface. More capacity. They know their model works, so they want to do more of it. Specifically, they need to ramp up their cell manufacturing to catch up with their module manufacturing.
Right, to close that gap we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Remember, they have over 10 gigawatts of modules, but only about 3 gigawatts of cells.
So they are still buying some cells from outside suppliers.
They are. And every cell they buy from outside is a little bit of margin that they're leaking to another company. To fully capture that margin, to become that perfect, vertically integrated pasta restaurant, they want to be 100% self-sufficient on cells.
So what's the target?
They are targeting 8.9 gigawatts of cell capacity by the fiscal year 2028. They're also building a massive new 6-gigawatt integrated facility at a place called Devanahalli.
Okay, so the plan is build more, sell more, classic growth story. But let's put on our skeptic hats now. Let's get critical. What breaks this beautiful thesis? What are the dangers lurking in the deep dive reality check?
I see 4 main risks that any listener, any investor needs to watch very, very closely. The first, and arguably the biggest one, is competition and oversupply.
Right, because Emmvee isn't the only one reading the news and seeing these opportunities. Everyone knows solar is booming in India.
Everyone is rushing in. It's a gold rush.
Yeah.
You have domestic giants like Waaree, Adani, Tata Power. They all see the same opportunity, and they're all building massive factories, too. We saw over 20 gigawatts of new capacity added in India just in the 24-25 period alone.
So if everyone builds factories at the same time, you eventually end up with way too many panels and not enough buyers.
That is the classic commodity cycle. Economists sometimes call it the pork cycle.
The pork cycle.
Yeah. The price of pork is high, so all the farmers decide to raise more pigs. A year later, there are suddenly too many pigs, the market is flooded, prices crash, and the farmers go bust. It happens over and over.
And it happens in solar.
It happens in solar, globally all the time. If supply exceeds demand, prices crash. It doesn't matter how good your technology is or how efficient your factory is. If the market is flooded, your margins get crushed. We've seen this happen in the solar industry globally multiple times. It's a classic boom and bust sector.
Right. And even with the ALMM protection from China, the domestic competition alone could start a brutal price war. Adani, for example, isn't exactly known for being shy about fighting for market share.
Not at all. They will fight for every last percentage point of market share. And that usually means cutting prices. So that's risk number 1. The second big risk is input volatility.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So Emmvee makes their own cells, yes, that's great. But they don't make the raw polysilicon that goes into the cells. They still have to buy that on the global commodity market.
And polysilicon prices are known to go a little crazy sometimes.
They are notoriously volatile. They're primarily controlled by a few large producers in China. In 2022, prices spiked massively due to supply chain disruptions. If that happens again, Emmvee's costs go up significantly. But remember, they've locked in contracts to sell their modules at fixed prices for the next year.
Oh, right. That's the danger of the fixed mortgage analogy we used earlier. It's great for the buyer, but if you're the bank, or in this case, the manufacturer, and your own funding costs suddenly go up, you lose.
You get squeezed. Exactly. If your input costs spike but your sale price is fixed, your margin gets absolutely crushed. You can go from 35% margins to 5% margins, or even negative margins very, very quickly.
That's a huge external risk they can't control. What's the third risk?
Technology obsolescence. We praise them, rightly so, for making the smart move to TOPCon. But what if the industry doesn't stop at TOPCon? What if it skips it and moves straight to something even better, like HJT heterojunction or perovskite technology, faster than anyone expects?
Right. It's like you bet the entire farm on building the world's best DVD player factory, and you've just finished it. And then the next day, streaming video takes off.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
You have the best DVD player factory in the world, but nobody wants DVDs anymore.
Your brand new factory is obsolete.
Precisely. If there's another technology leaped forward in the next 2 or 3 years, Emmvee could be left with these billions of dollars worth of expensive factories designed to build old TOPCon panels. They would have to retool everything, which costs a fortune and takes time. They'd lose their tech advantage.
A very real risk in a fast-moving tech sector. And the final risk, you said there were 4.
The final one is a bit softer, but no less important. It's key person risk. The source material we looked at highlights that the company is very reliant on their managing director, D.V. Manjunatha.
He's the visionary, the one driving the strategy.
He is. He's clearly been the driving force behind this massive pivot and this aggressive expansion. But the sources note that there is no clear succession plan that's been publicly mentioned. In a company that's growing this fast and is this dynamic, decision-making is often highly centralized around 1 or 2 key people.
Right.
If that central decision-maker steps away, or something happens, it can cause a vacuum in leadership and a real loss of strategic direction.
That's a very human risk in what seems like a very industrial technical story. So, okay, let's bring this all in for a landing. Let's try to summarize this whole journey.
I think we're looking at a company that has executed a textbook pivot just perfectly. They saw the tailwinds of India's energy transition. They capitalized on it. They leveraged a very smart and timely tech pivot to TOPCon. And they used the strategy of backward integration to manufacture their own cells, which allowed them to keep their margins incredibly high, 35% high.
I sense a but coming.
But the solar industry is a marathon, not a sprint. The current numbers, that 162% growth, those 35% margins, they are spectacular. But they are partly a result of a specific moment in time where demand is surging, new domestic capacity is just coming online, and government protectionism is at its peak.
A perfect storm in their favor.
A perfect storm. The real winner in this industry won't be the company who makes the most money in 2026. It will be the one who survives the inevitable price war when all that new supply finally catches up with demand.
That is a very sobering thought. It's so easy to look at a chart going up and to the right and just assume it never ends. But trees don't grow to the sky.
They don't. And Emmvee needs to use this cash-rich, high-margin period to fortify themselves, to build their brand, to innovate, to prepare for the tougher times that history tells us are definitely coming in this industry.
And that leads me to my final provocative thought for our listeners to chew on. We've talked a lot about the moat, that regulatory wall, the ALMM, the government protection. Emmvee has built an incredible fortress behind these walls. But walls work both ways, don't they?
They do.
They keep enemies out, but they can also keep you in. My question is this. As global supply chains rebalance, and as giants like China continue to innovate and export to the rest of the world, can a purely domestic-focused player like Emmvee hold the line forever? Or will they eventually need to look outside India, to the US, to Europe, to the Middle East to survive and to keep growing? And if they do step outside that fortress, are they ready to fight in the open field without the government's shield to protect them?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Can they compete on a global level based purely on their technology and cost, not just on a protected local level?
Something to think about the next time you see a solar panel glistening on a rooftop. Is that just a piece of technology, or is it a piece of geopolitical and economic strategy?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Probably. All right, I'm going to go check my roof. I think I have some space for a few kilowatts. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
Take care.